I think if we ask this audience for a show of hands on how many are migrants, I'm sure at least half of the auditorium would put their hands up. First generation migrants who came here in search of work, or as Pavel said, in search of an identity or in search of something. There are probably second generation migrants whose parents came here for the same things and then they were born here. Do we ever really become a non-migrant? Do we ever get a non-migrant identity? Will I, despite my name, will I continue to have 25% migrant blood in me because some set of grandparents came in here? So what I'm really curious about is, yes, there is that sense of a geographical, physical migration and the identity that we're trying to find. But there are also other aspects to migration. I'm not getting into the political aspect right now, but we will and we should. What I'm curious is that it's so easy when we discuss migration to limit it to physical or geographical migration, right? When a person moves from place A to place B. What about the other kinds of migrations that happen sometimes within us? What about the cultural migration? What about the linguistic migration? I mean, English is not a language, is not a mother tongue, it's not my mother tongue, and yet I speak, read, write, dream in English. So we migrate in so many different ways, in food, culture, language. We absorb, we assimilate, and we also then other something that we can't absorb. Yeah. The second thing is that it's a bit of a myth again for any city or a country to see migration as this 21st century vexed problem, which politicians often make it out to be. It's not. The history of humankind really can't be told fully unless you put the strand of migration through it. Clans migrated, communities migrated, nationalities also moved from a place to place. We went in search of new lands, new frontiers, and all of that. Migration, number three, migration has a definite economic basis to it. People go out of their comfort zones, or what they call quote unquote home, because there are jobs, there is work, there is economic opportunity in some way, and you don't know what kind of a life you're going to get, but you want to try that out. Maybe it'll be better. So there is this thing that unless we recognize that a city like Bombay or Mumbai, I grew up and I worked at a time when it was still Bombay, so the name that first comes to me is Bombay, so I'm going to, with your permission, I'm going to move between the two. Bombay was a place that people migrated to from the time that there were Muslim rulers in Gujarat. People came to Bombay. Then during the Portuguese, there were migrations. During the British, there were huge migrations also because Bombay was a presidency that comprised Gujarat and lots of other places. So to now suddenly look at migration as if, if you now cross the Hisar Cheknaka and Mulund Cheknaka, then you're migrating into Bombay, it's a joke. Because this is a city that was made by migrants, it's made of migrants, in much the same way that perhaps countries like America is a country made of and by migrants. So in such a city then, where migration, phases of migrations have created something to the city and have built something in the city, who really is a migrant? Who is a native? And at what point do the migrants become the natives? So is it that because a political party has the power, it gets to decide that, hey, no, you are a migrant because you came in 2005 from Uttar Pradesh, but I am a native because my forefather came here in the 20th century. Who gets to decide this and how? So these are really huge, vexed questions.
Right.
And so to answer your question, who is a migrant? I seriously don't think there is one definitive answer.
Is Bombay inclusive in that sense of migrants?
This is such a complex thing. It is inclusive in the sense, at a people-to-people level, it's probably inclusive. So if Pavel comes, I think most of us would welcome and make her a part of ourselves. But as Dr. Iruda said, at the policy level, we know that the city is being made by migrants, but we really have no place for them in what we want to give to them, or how we want to make them a part of the city's life and all of that. I'll give you the example of Chhat Puja, okay? And this has to do with the pattern of migration in Mumbai, and I think there are enough faces I see my colleagues who've probably done as much work on migration. In the last decade or so, migration to Bombay has actually declined. There was one decade, and I think Dr. Irudaya will bear me out, in which Bombay got demigrated. More people went from Bombay, and that was the decade of 1921 to 31. Depression, illness, social unrest, and all of that. But if we leave that one decade, in the last 100 years, usually more people have come into Bombay than going out. And the largest number of migrants were in the decades of 51 to 61, and a little less than that from 61 to 71. Now, why are these decades important? Because this was the post-independence era, immediate post-independence, so we wanted to become this powerhouse of a nation. How do we do it? Because Bombay was anyway the economic headquarters of a lot of things, so the industries boomed, the textile industry was booming. Over a course of time, engineering industries came to be set up here, consumer goods came to be set up here, the financial headquarters became here, pharmaceutical industries, oil refineries. So what do we see? We see that opportunities were created in a way that brought people to this city, and the city got made. And then, in the 80s and 90s, you see a very, very clear trend in the other direction. The formal manufacturing sector began to shut down as a result of government policies and many other factors, liberalization, globalization, all of that. So as your formal industries began to shut down, other more service-oriented economies, and now the gig economy started mushrooming. Why do I think it's important to mention this? Because when the formal manufacturing sector was in its ascendancy, either because of government policies or whatever else, you had a way of accommodating the migrant population. So the textile mills owners built or were forced to build the chawls. So there was some kind of housing. Now chawls, there is this whole romantic notion of a chawl because they are disappearing also. We have that nostalgia and romance, but chawls it was not a greatly romantic life for those who lived in them and grew up in them. There were shades of romance there, but it was not all great. But there was formal accommodation available. What happens when the formal industries die down? You have informal economies who are not even obliged to offer you provident funds, let alone accommodation. Where is your accommodation? So you've come here to earn, but you have nowhere to live, and what you earn can't support you in how you want to live in the gated community. So what do? So slums grow.
Right.
And then Bombay as a city does not want slums. Half of us are slums, but we don't want them. So there has been this great mismatch, or almost what I'd call a schizophrenic kind of an attitude to how we welcome or don't welcome migrants, and in what form. As labor, as a pair of hands, as a head that thinks or does clerical work, great. You call and your bhajiwala and your fruitwala will bring the stuff to your doorstep. He's a migrant. You take a cab, your cab driver is a migrant. You go to your bank, your relationship manager is probably a migrant, a first generation migrant,
Right.
yeah, from Kanpur or somewhere. Your CEO of some firms here are migrants. By the way, 1 to 1.5% of all migration into Mumbai is international migration, right? And that's the migration we don't talk about. Why don't we talk about them? Because they don't threaten us. They're not going to take our votes. They don't claim resources the way other migrants do. So we don't talk. So the whole idea then becomes very fluid. But let me end this with the example of Chhat Puja. So when the Chhat Puja, as we know, is a big major festival in Bihar, and when there were enough number of Biharis in Mumbai, and particularly in slums, who wanted to celebrate the Chhat Puja, it became a very political thing, where the Shiv Sena and other politicians said, this is not a Mumbai festival. We won't allow you to occupy the streets and go to the Juhu Chowpatty or wherever else. What did they mean by saying this is not a Mumbai festival? And I think many of us here in this room will remember the kind of violence that happened during Chhat Puja processions and celebrations even 10 years ago. Now what do we see? In 2018-19, what do I see? And I'm saying this from first-hand experience. I see that the police have made arrangements for the Chhat Puja processions to proceed. There are enough arrangements made on the beaches in Juhu Beach and at other water bodies for the devotees to conduct their Chhat Puja. Now let someone try saying Chhat Puja is not a Mumbai festival. So I think there is a gradual process by which some things become part of a city even if they are brought by migrants, and some things just don't. And that, I think, depends on who the migrant is. And in a city like Bombay, I remember doing the research for a chapter that I wrote, which is for a book that was on chawls, the galleries of Mumbai. And that research was then borne out by statistics that IIPS, the Institute of Population Studies, and others put out, which is that 90% of women who migrate, 10% maybe the construction workers and others, but 90% of the women who migrate did so because they got married here. And I remember speaking to a gamut of women for that chapter who said that, you know, back home in Konkan, in Ratnagiri, in Sindhudurg, we had so much space that I didn't know what to do. I'd leave things and not worry about it. And I came here, and then I had to be in this 10 by 10 room with a balcony outside. Suddenly I did not know how to adapt, what to do. I would get depressed, but I didn't know where to go. So I don't think these are aspects that anybody considers. Of course, there are children and of course there are people, but organizations which look specifically at children's education health. But there is a cost that people are paying to be in a new place, in a new city. And this leads me to the point that Mumbai is a melting pot. It's a great line to use. You know, we keep saying Bombay is a melting pot, melting pot. It's not really a melting pot, because in this city, my experience is that there are a large number of ghettos. So I know politicians, for example, who say, "Yaar, main to Chote Bihar jaake aaya." Where is the Chota Bihar? I know where it is. He knows where it is, and he knows that those votes are the ones that are really, really important for him. So there is this little Bihar, there is this little Azamgarh, there is this little something. So in this city, which we consider or used to consider till recently to be a cosmopolitan, and I would still like to believe that it is more cosmopolitan than other cities in this country, we still have ghettos of people who have come from certain areas. Again, this is not a new phenomenon, because we know that Matunga, yes, Chembur, yeah, or Valkeshwar, Girgaon. So it's not a new thing, But this is the other side of that social cost. Now, because a city cannot be very completely welcoming to you or include you, what you do, as Pavel said, is you tend to then gravitate towards your own.